I was sitting in my garage, winterizing my Snowmachine trailer when Brenda Carmichael appeared in my driveway like some kind of suburban specter, clipboard clutched against her chest like a shield. The look on her face told me everything I needed to know before she even opened her mouth. "Robert Duncan, I need to speak with you about a violation," she announced, her voice carrying that particular blend of self-righteousness and manufactured authority that only comes from being president of the Pine Ridge Homeowners Association in Boulder, Colorado. I straightened up from checking the trailer's wheel bearings, wiping my hands on an old rag. The November air was crisp, and I could smell snow coming down from the mountains. It had been a long week already with 2 rescue calls, and the last thing I needed was HOA drama. "What violation would that be, Brenda?" She consulted her clipboard with theatrical precision. "This trailer. It's been parked in your driveway for 6 consecutive days, which violates Article 7, Section 3 of our community guidelines. Recreational vehicles, boats, and trailers must be stored out of sight or in enclosed garages." I took a deep breath, counting to 5. "That's not a recreational vehicle trailer. It's work equipment. It clearly says Snowmachine on the side," she pointed with one perfectly manicured nail. "That makes it recreational. It says snowmobile rescue equipment," I corrected her, gesturing to the lettering on the side that clearly identified it as belonging to the Boulder County Mountain Rescue Team. "I'm a volunteer rescue coordinator. This trailer hauls specialized equipment for mountain rescue operations." Brenda's expression didn't change. "I don't care if it hauls the president himself. The rules are quite clear, Robert. No trailers visible from the street for more than 72 hours. You've had 6 days. I've documented it." She tapped her clipboard again. "Did you happen to notice we've had 2 major rescue operations this week? There was a group of hikers lost near Newat Ridge, and a snowboarder went missing in the backcountry near Netherland. This equipment needs to be ready for immediate deployment." "That's very noble, I'm sure," Brenda said, her tone suggesting it was anything but noble. "However, your volunteer activities don't exempt you from community standards. If we allow exceptions for you, everyone will want one. Next thing you know, we'll have boats and RVs lining every driveway. Property values will plummet." I felt my jaw tightening. "This isn't about property values. This is about saving lives. This is about maintaining the aesthetic quality of our neighborhood," she countered. "I'm giving you 48 hours to remove the trailer from site. After that, the association will begin fining you $50 per day until you comply. The rules apply to everyone equally." She turned on her heel and marched back down my driveway, leaving me standing there with a greasy rag in one hand and mounting frustration building in my chest. I looked at the trailer, really looked at it. The thing was older than my marriage had been, painted in high-visibility orange and white, loaded with gear that had saved dozens of lives over the years. Inside were snowmobiles modified for rescue work, medical supplies, avalanche equipment, communications gear, and specialized tools that could mean the difference between someone making it home to their family or not. My phone buzzed. It was Marcus Chen, another member of the rescue team. "Hey Robert, just checking on the equipment status. Weather Service is predicting a major storm system moving in this weekend. Want to make sure we're ready for the inevitable influx of weekend warriors getting themselves into trouble." "Equipment's fine," I said. "But we might have a problem with the HOA." "You're kidding." "What now?" I explained the situation while walking back into my garage. Marcus had dealt with his own HOA issues at his place in Louisville, so he understood the particular brand of bureaucratic frustration these organizations could generate. "Can't you just park it at the county facility?" he asked. You know we don't have the budget for that anymore. The county cut funding last year, remember? Half our operations are running on volunteer equipment and private donations now. I store this trailer because I have the space and it saves the team money. Plus, response time matters. If I get called out at 3 in the morning, I need to be able to hook up and go. Right, yeah, that budget cut really screwed us. What are you going to do? I don't know yet. Let me make some calls. I spent the next hour researching Colorado HOA law, which was about as entertaining as watching paint dry in a blizzard. The state had regulations governing what HOAs could and couldn't restrict, but from what I could tell, trailer parking fell into a gray area. The association had broad authority to set aesthetic standards, but there were also provisions for reasonable accommodations, especially for emergency services. That evening, I drafted a formal letter to the HOA board, explaining the nature of my volunteer work, the life-saving importance of the equipment, and requesting a formal exception to the trailer parking rule. I kept it professional, included documentation of my certification as a rescue coordinator, and attached photos of the trailer being used in actual rescue operations. I even included a letter from the Boulder County Sheriff's Department commending our team's work. I submitted it through the HOA's online portal and sent a hard copy by certified mail. Then I waited. 3 days passed. The weather system Marcus had mentioned was building over the Rockies, and the forecast was getting worse. We were looking at potentially heavy snow, high winds, and whiteout conditions starting Friday evening. The rescue team held a preparedness meeting at the County Emergency Services building, going over protocols and making sure everyone had their gear ready. "How's the trailer situation?" Marcus asked as we were loading supplies. "Haven't heard back from the HOA yet. The 48 hours they gave me technically expired yesterday, but I'm not moving it until I get a response to my exception request." That seems reasonable. Reasonable doesn't always factor into HOA decisions. I got home around 8 that evening to find a citation envelope stuck to my front door. Inside was a notice that I was now being fined $50 per day for the trailer violation, effective immediately. There was no mention of my exception request, no acknowledgement of the documentation I'd submitted. Just a bill and a warning that continued non-compliance could result in legal action, including liens against my property. I called the HOA management company's emergency line. After navigating through an automated system clearly designed to discourage actual human contact, I finally reached a bored-sounding woman named Jennifer. "I need to speak to someone about an exception request I submitted," I said. "Exception requests are reviewed at the monthly board meeting." "The next meeting is in 3 weeks. 3 weeks. I submitted documentation explaining that this is emergency services equipment. I need a response before that." "The board meets once per month, sir. That's the policy. Can't they have a special meeting? Or at least put a hold on the fines until they review my request?" "Fines continue to accrue until the violation is resolved. That's also policy." I felt my blood pressure rising. So I'm supposed to pay $50 a day for 3 weeks while waiting for them to read a letter explaining why this is essential equipment for saving people's lives. "You could resolve the violation by removing the trailer, sir. It's rescue equipment for emergencies. We have a major storm coming. I understand your frustration, but I don't make the rules. I just process the paperwork." I hung up before I said something I'd regret. My hands were shaking slightly. I'd been a volunteer with the mountain rescue team for 8 years, had helped save more than 40 people in that time, had spent countless hours in brutal conditions pulling lost hikers, injured climbers, and stranded skiers off mountains. And now I was being fined for having the tools to do that job. The storm hit Friday evening right on schedule. By midnight, we had our first call-out. A group of 4 college students from CU Boulder had gone backcountry skiing near the Brainerd Lake area despite the weather warnings. 2 of them had become separated from the group in whiteout conditions. The other 2 had made it back to their car and called 911. I was hooking up the trailer to my truck when Brenda appeared again, this time in a puffy winter coat with a flashlight. "Where do you think you're going with that?" she demanded. "Emergency rescue call," I said, not stopping. "2 people lost in a blizzard. You still haven't removed this trailer. Your fines are accumulating." I paused, turned to face her. "Brenda, there are 2 human beings out there right now, probably hypothermic, definitely terrified. This trailer has the equipment I need to find them and bring them home alive. Can we please deal with the paperwork after I make sure they don't freeze to death?" The rules don't pause for convenience, Robert. This isn't convenience. This is life and death. And this association has rules that maintain order. If I let you slide, everyone will claim their violation is an emergency. I didn't have time to argue. I finished securing the trailer hitch, checked the lights, and pulled out of my driveway with Brenda still standing there, making notes on her ever-present clipboard. The rescue operation took 14 hours. The college students had made every mistake in the book, going out in deteriorating conditions without proper gear, without filing a trip plan, without adequate experience. We found them 6 miles from the trailhead, huddled together in a snow cave they'd managed to dig. They were hypothermic but alive. We got them stabilized, loaded them onto the rescue snowmobiles, and transported them back to waiting paramedics. They'd both survive, though one of them would lose a couple toes to frostbite. I got home Sunday afternoon, exhausted, my face wind-burned, my muscles aching. I parked the trailer in my driveway and literally fell asleep on my couch, still wearing half my cold weather gear. Monday morning brought another citation, this one with increased fines. I was now being charged $100 per day, with a notice that the HOA board had voted to escalate penalties for flagrant and continued violations. There was still no mention of my exception request. I called the management company again. This time I got a different person, an older man named Richard who at least seemed to listen. "I see your exception request in the system," he said. "It's marked as pending board review. When will that happen?" "The next scheduled meeting is November 20th. That's still 2 weeks away. Can I at least speak to someone on the board before then?" Board members don't typically engage with homeowners outside of official meetings. It's to prevent conflicts of interest and maintain impartiality. There's nothing impartial about fining me while refusing to review my explanation for the violation. "I understand your concern, sir. Would you like to request time to speak at the next board meeting?" "Yes, definitely yes. I'll put you on the agenda. You'll have 5 minutes to address the board. 5 minutes to explain why emergency rescue equipment deserved an exception to trailer parking rules." It seemed absurd, but it was better than nothing. The next week brought 2 more rescue calls. The storm system had moved through, leaving deep powder that attracted backcountry enthusiasts and also created serious avalanche conditions. We pulled out 3 snowshoers who'd been partially buried in a slide near Mount Audubon, and rescued a solo hiker who'd broken his leg and spent a night in sub-freezing temperatures near the Continental Divide. Each time I used the trailer, Brenda documented it. She started taking photos, time-stamped and GPS tagged, creating what amounted to a surveillance record of my comings and goings. I'd see her watching from her window, or sometimes standing in her yard with her phone out, recording me loading or unloading equipment. "This is getting creepy," Marcus said when I told him about it. "What's her problem?" "Control," I said. "Or maybe she just genuinely believes that visible trailers are an existential threat to neighborhood property values. Hard to say." "Have you thought about just moving it to someone else's property? Maybe someone outside the HOA. That defeats the whole purpose. The reason I keep it at my place is response time. If we get a call-out, especially at night, every minute matters. If I have to drive across town to pick up a trailer, that could mean the difference between finding someone alive or not." "Yeah, but at this rate, the fines are going to bankrupt you." He wasn't wrong. By my calculation, I was now accumulating over $700 per week in HOA fines. I could afford it for a while, but not indefinitely. And there was the added threat of a lien on my property, which could affect my credit, my ability to refinance, potentially even lead to foreclosure if they pursued it aggressively enough. I started making calls to local news stations. One of them, a reporter named Sarah at the Denver affiliate of a major network, seemed interested. "Let me see if I can get a crew out there," she said. "This kind of story plays well. HOA overreach, volunteer rescuers, life and death stakes. It's got everything." "I'm not trying to make anyone look bad," I said. "I just want a reasonable solution. Sometimes public pressure is the only thing that creates reasonable solutions with these associations." The news crew came out the following Wednesday, a week before the board meeting. Sarah interviewed me in my driveway, with the trailer prominently visible behind us. I showed her the equipment inside, explained how each piece was used, described recent rescues. She interviewed Marcus and 2 other team members. She even got a statement from the Boulder County Sheriff's Department emphasizing the vital role volunteer rescue teams played in the region. Then she went to interview Brenda. I wasn't there for that conversation, but I saw it when it aired that evening. Brenda, wearing a crisp business suit and standing in front of the Pine Ridge HOA community sign, defended the association's position with unwavering certainty. "We have rules for a reason," she said. "Rules that every homeowner agreed to when they purchased property here. Mr. Duncan's volunteer work is certainly commendable, but it doesn't entitle him to special treatment. If we create exemptions for one person, where does it end? The integrity of our community standards depends on consistent enforcement." The reporter asked, "Even when those standards potentially interfere with emergency services? The trailer could easily be stored elsewhere. Mr. Duncan is choosing to violate our rules rather than find an alternative solution. That's not the association's fault." The news piece aired on the evening broadcast. My phone started ringing immediately. Other homeowners from the neighborhood, some supportive, others critical. Friends from the rescue team. My sister calling from Fort Collins to ask if I'd really pissed off my HOA badly enough to make the news. The next morning, I woke to find my driveway spray painted with the words "Park somewhere else." Orange paint, bright and ugly against the concrete. I called the police to file a vandalism report, knowing it probably wouldn't lead anywhere but wanting it documented. The officer who responded was sympathetic and had actually heard about the situation from the news coverage. "That's rough, man," he said, taking photos of the graffiti. "My brother-in-law is on a rescue team up in Summit County. These HOAs can be brutal. Any chance of finding who did this?" Honestly, probably not unless you have security cameras that caught them in the act. I didn't. But I installed 2 cameras that afternoon, covering my driveway and front yard. If someone wanted to escalate things, I'd at least have evidence. The HOA board meeting finally arrived. It was held in a conference room at the Pine Ridge Clubhouse, a building that also housed a small gym and community pool. About 15 people attended, mostly board members and a few other homeowners there to address various issues. The room smelled like old carpet and burned coffee. Brenda sat at the head of a folding table, flanked by 4 other board members whose names I recognized from community newsletters but had never actually met. There was Harold Pembroke, a retired accountant who served as treasurer; Linda Martinez, secretary, who worked in real estate; Tom Gillespie and Susan Winters, both at-large members who mostly seemed to be there to nod along with whatever Brenda said. The meeting began with standard business: approval of last month's minutes, financial reports, discussion of landscaping contracts. 40 minutes of tedium before they finally reached the agenda item about my trailer. Item 7, Brenda announced. Request for exception to parking restrictions, Robert Duncan. Mr. Duncan, you have 5 minutes. I stood, suddenly aware that my mouth was dry. Public speaking had never been my strength, but I'd prepared notes. Thank you. As you know, I'm a volunteer coordinator with the Boulder County Mountain Rescue Team. I've been doing this work for 8 years. The trailer in my driveway isn't recreational equipment. It's a mobile response unit containing specialized snowmobiles, medical supplies, avalanche safety gear, and communications equipment. This equipment has been directly involved in saving 43 lives during my time with the team. I pulled out a folder of documentation, passing copies to each board member. I've included photos from actual rescues, letters of commendation from the sheriff's department, and documentation showing that our team operates primarily on volunteer resources due to county budget constraints. I keep this trailer at my home because response time is critical. In mountain rescue, the difference between life and death is often measured in minutes. Brenda glanced at the documents without really looking at them. Mr. Duncan, we appreciate your service to the community. However, the association has clear rules about parking restrictions. These rules exist to maintain property values and neighborhood aesthetics. Every homeowner agreed to these restrictions when they purchased their property. I understand that, I said. I'm not asking to void the rules. I'm asking for a reasonable accommodation for emergency services equipment. Colorado law allows HOAs to grant exceptions for special circumstances. Harold, the treasurer, spoke up. What prevents you from storing this trailer at the county facility or another location? 2 things. First, response time. If I get called out at 2 in the morning for someone lost in a blizzard, I need to be able to hook up and go immediately. Driving across town to retrieve equipment could add 30 minutes or more to response time. Second, cost. The county doesn't have facility space available, and commercial storage would run several $100s per month. Our team operates on a shoestring budget. We can't afford that expense. Linda Martinez, the real estate agent, jumped in. I understand your position, but you also need to understand ours. Properties in HOA communities typically maintain higher values than comparable non-HOA properties, precisely because of these standards. Visible trailers, RVs, and boats create visual clutter that potential buyers find unappealing. That affects everyone's property values, not just yours. I get that aesthetic standards matter, I said, but we're talking about a piece of equipment that actively saves lives. Last month, 2 college students would have died from hypothermia without this trailer and the gear it carries. How do we weigh their lives against the possibility that someone driving through the neighborhood might find a parked trailer unappealing? That's an emotional argument, not a practical one, Brenda said. Your volunteer work is commendable, but it's still volunteer work. It's not your job. You're not a full-time emergency services employee. This is a hobby. I felt heat rising in my face. It's not a hobby. Hobbies are what you do for fun. I do this because people's lives depend on it. Nevertheless, you choose to do it, Brenda continued. And your choice doesn't override the agreements that govern this community. We're denying your exception request. You have 1 week to remove the trailer from the property or face escalating fines and potential legal action. Can we at least vote on this? I asked, looking at the other board members. We already did, Brenda said. Before the meeting, the decision was unanimous. I stood there, folder still in hand, realizing I'd driven all the way to the meeting and prepared documentation for a decision that had already been made. You voted before even hearing what I had to say. We reviewed your written request. Nothing you've said tonight changes the fundamental issue. Tom Gillespie, who hadn't spoken yet, added, You know, there's a self-storage place just off Highway 36. They have RV and trailer parking. Problem solved. That's 15 minutes away in good weather, I said. Longer in a storm, and it costs money our team doesn't have. Susan Winters shrugged. Maybe you need better fundraising, or talk to the county about increasing the budget. Those aren't HOA problems. I looked around the room at the 5 faces staring back at me with varying degrees of indifference or hostility. This was pointless. They'd made their decision before I walked in, and nothing I said was going to change it. Is there an appeals process? I asked. You can request reconsideration at a future meeting, Brenda said. But I'll tell you now, the answer won't change. Rules are rules. I gathered my documents and left. Outside, the November night was cold and clear, stars visible overhead. I sat in my truck for a few minutes trying to process what had just happened. 8 years of volunteer service, dozens of lives saved, and none of it mattered because a trailer violated aesthetic standards. My phone rang. It was Sarah, the reporter from the news station. How did the meeting go? She asked, about like you'd expect. They denied the exception, didn't even seriously consider it. Would you be willing to do a follow-up interview? I think there's more to this story. At this point, sure, why not? The follow-up piece aired 2 days later, this time with more context about HOA law in Colorado and interviews with legal experts discussing the balance between community standards and reasonable accommodations. It also featured an interview with one of the college students I'd helped rescue, a young woman named Emily who broke down in tears talking about her experience being lost in the storm and the relief she felt when our team found her. The story got picked up by national news outlets. Suddenly, my local HOA dispute was trending on social media, with thousands of people weighing in. Most of the reaction was supportive, with people expressing outrage that an HOA would interfere with rescue operations. But there were also plenty of comments defending property rights and the importance of enforcing community standards. Brenda and the HOA board became overnight villains in certain corners of the internet. Someone created a parody social media account called Karen HOA President that mocked Brenda's statements from the news interviews. It wasn't fair or entirely accurate, but once the internet decides someone is a villain, there's not much anyone can do about it. The attention created its own problems. Reporters started showing up at Pine Ridge, trying to interview other homeowners, getting footage of the neighborhood. Some homeowners were angry at me for bringing negative attention to the community. Others were supportive and started a petition to recall the HOA board. Things came to a head the following Tuesday. I was in my garage, working on one of the rescue snowmobiles, when 3 men I'd never seen before pulled up in a truck with Wyoming plates. They got out and walked toward my driveway with the kind of swagger that immediately put me on alert. You Robert Duncan, the biggest one asked. Who's asking? We've been following your situation with the HOA. We deal with that kind of bureaucratic nonsense too. Thought maybe we could help solve your trailer problem. How's that? The guy grinned. These HOA people, they push because nobody pushes back. Maybe your trailer gets parked right in front of the clubhouse one night. Maybe some of their cars develop mysterious flat tires. Make them understand there are consequences for messing with people. I set down the wrench I'd been holding. I appreciate the sentiment, but no, that's not how this gets solved. You sure? Because from where we're standing, being nice isn't working out too well for you, I'm sure. I'm not looking to escalate this into vandalism or worse. I just want to do my job without harassment. The guy shrugged. Your call. Offer stands if you change your mind. They left, and I immediately called the non-emergency police line to report the encounter. The last thing I needed was vigilante help that would give the HOA legitimate ammunition against me. That same afternoon, Marcus called with news. The county commissioners are having an emergency meeting tomorrow about volunteer rescue operations. Word is they're concerned about the negative publicity and looking at ways to support the teams better. That's good, I guess. More than good. Some of the commissioners are talking about formally designating volunteer rescue coordinators as essential emergency personnel, which might give you legal protection against HOA restrictions. It's complicated. They'd have to research the law, maybe get the county attorney involved. But at least they're taking it seriously. The county commission meeting was packed. In addition to the usual handful of attendees, there were reporters, curious citizens, and most of the volunteer rescue team. The commissioners, 5 elected officials who governed Boulder County, seemed genuinely concerned about the situation. Commissioner Patricia Hayes, who represented our district, addressed the issue directly. We're hearing about a situation where HOA restrictions are potentially interfering with volunteer emergency services. This is troubling. These volunteer teams save lives and save the county significant money by providing services we couldn't otherwise afford. We need to understand the legal framework and determine what authority we have to protect these volunteers. The county attorney, a sharp-looking woman named Michelle Rodriguez, had prepared a memo. Colorado law does allow counties to designate certain individuals as essential emergency personnel. However, this designation typically applies to employees, not volunteers. There's some gray area in the law we'd need to explore. Explore it, Commissioner Hayes said. We can't have HOAs interfering with emergency services. That's a public safety issue. Another commissioner, Jim Peters, was less supportive. Let's be careful here. HOAs exist for legitimate reasons. They're private organizations with legal authority to enforce their rules. We can't just override them anytime someone claims hardship. This isn't hardship, Commissioner Hayes shot back. This is emergency rescue operations. There's a clear public interest in supporting these activities. The debate continued for another hour. Eventually, the commission voted 4-1 to direct the county attorney to research options for protecting volunteer emergency responders from HOA restrictions. Commissioner Peters was the sole dissenting vote. It wasn't a solution, but it was movement in the right direction. Meanwhile, the fines continued accumulating. I was now up to over $3,000 in HOA penalties. The management company sent increasingly threatening letters about liens and legal action. I consulted with a lawyer, an attorney named David Reeves who specialized in HOA disputes. Here's the reality, David told me in his office overlooking downtown Boulder. HOAs have a lot of authority under Colorado law. They can fine you. They can place liens on your property, and they can ultimately foreclose if you don't pay. However, they also have to follow their own governing documents and operate reasonably. The question is whether refusing to accommodate emergency services equipment is reasonable. Seems pretty unreasonable to me. A judge might agree, but litigation is expensive and slow. Even if you win eventually, you could spend tens of thousands in legal fees getting there. And there's no guarantee you'd win. HOA law tends to favor enforcement of recorded restrictions. So what are my options? Pay the fines, move the trailer, or fight it in court? None of them are great options. I left the lawyer's office feeling defeated. The whole situation had spiraled far beyond what I'd ever imagined when Brenda first appeared in my driveway with her clipboard. That evening, I got a call from an unlisted number. When I answered, a woman's voice asked, "Is this Robert Duncan?" "Who is this?" "My name is Nicole Thompson. I'm an attorney with the Colorado Civil Liberties Union. We've been following your situation and we'd like to help." That got my attention. How? "We believe this raises important questions about the balance between private restrictions and public safety. We're prepared to represent you pro bono if you want to fight this. No cost to you." Why would you do that? Because cases like this set precedent. If HOAs can interfere with volunteer emergency services, that affects communities across the state. We think it's worth fighting. Nicole Thompson turned out to be exactly the kind of lawyer you'd want in a fight. She was thorough, aggressive, and deeply knowledgeable about both HOA law and emergency services regulations. Within a week, she'd filed a lawsuit against the Pine Ridge HOA on my behalf, arguing that the parking restrictions as applied to emergency services equipment were unreasonable and contrary to public policy. The lawsuit also requested an immediate injunction preventing the HOA from enforcing fines or taking action against my property while the case was pending. A judge granted a temporary restraining order, freezing the fines where they stood and preventing the HOA from pursuing liens or other penalties. Brenda was furious. She gave another interview to the local news, this time calling me a publicity seeker who was weaponizing sympathy to avoid following rules. She insisted the HOA was simply enforcing reasonable standards, and that I was trying to use the legal system to bully the association into submission. The irony of an HOA president accusing someone else of bullying was not lost on the internet, which roasted her mercilessly in the comments. The legal battle dragged on through December and into January. Discovery requests, depositions, motions, and counter-motions. Nicole was handling everything, but I still had to participate, sitting for a deposition where the HOA's lawyer grilled me for hours about my volunteer work, my motivations for keeping the trailer at home, and whether I'd deliberately courted media attention. "Isn't it true that you contacted the news station before even trying to resolve this matter with the HOA?" the lawyer asked. "No. I submitted a formal exception request and waited for a response. I only contacted the media after the HOA started fining me without reviewing my request." "But you did contact the media." "After exhausting other options, yes. And you've enjoyed the attention, haven't you? The interviews, the social media support. I don't enjoy any of this. I enjoy doing rescue work. I enjoy helping people. I don't enjoy fighting with my HOA." During this whole period, rescue operations continued. The winter was particularly harsh, with heavy snowfall and challenging conditions. Our team responded to 23 calls between November and January. I used the trailer for every single one, documenting each use carefully per Nicole's instructions. Photos, GPS logs, incident reports, building a record of just how essential the equipment was. One rescue in particular stood out. A family of 4 had gone snowshoeing near Brainard Lake, a popular area even in winter. Their youngest child, a 6-year-old boy named Tyler, had wandered off while his parents were setting up a picnic. By the time they realized he was missing and called for help, the temperature was dropping towards 0 and light snow was beginning to fall. We mobilized immediately, bringing search dogs, thermal imaging equipment, and extra personnel. The search area was vast, and a small child could cover surprising distances. Every minute that passed increased the danger. We found Tyler 3 hours into the search, curled up behind a fallen log about a mile from where he'd separated from his family. He was hypothermic and non-responsive. We got warming packs on him, wrapped him in an emergency blanket, and transported him on one of the rescue snowmobiles back to the trailhead, where an ambulance was waiting. Tyler spent 2 days in the hospital, but recovered fully. His parents came to the County Rescue Services building a week later to thank the team in person. Tyler's mother hugged me and cried, saying she couldn't imagine what would have happened if we hadn't found him when we did. He wouldn't have lasted another hour in those conditions, the emergency room doctor had told them. Those moments made everything else worthwhile. The HOA disputes, the fines, the legal battles, none of it mattered compared to a 6-year-old boy going home to his family. But the legal case still had to play out. In February, we had our first substantive court hearing. The judge, a middle-aged woman named Sandra Wright, had reviewed all the filings and was ready to hear arguments about whether the restraining order should continue and whether the case had merit. Nicole argued that Colorado public policy strongly favored emergency services, that HOA restrictions had to yield when they conflicted with public safety, and that requiring me to store equipment off-site would materially impact rescue response times. The HOA's lawyer, a slick guy named Preston Aldrich, countered that property rights and voluntary agreements were fundamental to American law, that I had agreed to the restrictions when I bought my house, and that accommodating my request would open the door to endless exceptions that would undermine HOA authority statewide. Judge Wright listened carefully, asked probing questions, and ultimately continued the restraining order. "I'm not prepared to dismiss this case at this stage," she said. "The plaintiff has raised legitimate questions about the interaction between private restrictions and public safety. This deserves a full hearing." That was a victory of sorts. The restraining order meant the fines stayed frozen and the HOA couldn't take action against me while the case proceeded. But it also meant more months of legal proceedings. In March, things took a darker turn. Someone slashed 2 of my truck tires and spray-painted "Sue This" on the side of my trailer. The vandalism happened overnight, and while my security cameras caught footage of a figure in dark clothing, the person's face wasn't visible. I filed another police report, and this time the officer seemed more concerned. "This is escalating," he said. "Someone's really angry about this situation. You think it's the HOA, I'm not saying that, but someone connected to this dispute. You should be careful." I installed more cameras and started parking my truck in the garage. The trailer was too large for the garage, so it remained in the driveway, but at least I could protect my vehicle. 2 weeks later, I came home from a grocery run to find Brenda in my driveway again, this time with a man I didn't recognize. He was holding a tape measure and a camera. "What's going on?" I asked, getting out of my truck with bags of groceries. "Just documenting more violations," Brenda said. "Your grass is a 1/4 inch over the maximum permitted height, and your trash cans are visible from the street outside of collection hours." The man with the camera was photographing everything. My grass, my trash cans, even the small garden gnome my sister had given me as a joke that sat beside my front steps. Are you serious right now? I'm always serious about rule enforcement, Brenda said. Just because you've gotten media attention doesn't mean you're exempt from community standards. This is harassment. This is my job as HOA president, maintaining standards. I carried my groceries inside without responding further. Nicole had warned me that the HOA might retaliate by looking for other violations, no matter how petty. They'll try to make your life difficult, she'd said. Don't give them ammunition. Follow every rule perfectly. I spent the next weekend making sure my property was in flawless compliance with every HOA regulation. I cut my grass precisely to the permitted height. I repainted my front door to match the exact approved color. I trimmed trees and bushes to regulation dimensions. I even moved the garden gnome inside. In April, the case finally went to trial. It was held in Boulder County District Court, a modern building where I'd testified before in other contexts, but never as a plaintiff. The courtroom was larger than I expected, with wood paneling and a sense of formality that made everything feel weighty and serious. Nicole had prepared extensively. She called me as the first witness, walking through my background with the rescue team, describing specific operations where the trailer had been essential, and explaining why response time mattered so critically in mountain rescue. Then she called Marcus, who testified about the team's budget constraints and the importance of volunteers providing their own resources. She called the Boulder County Sheriff, who explained how volunteer rescue teams were integrated into the county's emergency response system. She even called Tyler's mother, who tearfully described the rescue of her son and the professional, rapid response our team had provided. The HOA's defense was more technical. Preston Aldrich called a real estate appraiser, who testified that visible trailers could reduce property values by up to 5%. He called other homeowners from Pine Ridge, who complained about the trailer's appearance and the media attention the dispute had brought. He called Brenda, who testified at length about the importance of uniform rule enforcement. If we allow Mr. Duncan to park his trailer indefinitely, Brenda said from the witness stand, then we have to allow everyone to claim special circumstances. The mechanic who wants to park his work truck, the contractor who wants to store equipment, the family who wants to keep their RV visible. Where does it end? Rules only work if they apply equally to everyone. Nicole cross-examined her aggressively. Do you agree that mountain rescue operations save lives? Of course. And you're aware that response time is critical in rescue situations? I suppose so. You suppose so. Your Honor, I'd like to introduce Exhibit 17, a study from the National Association for Search and Rescue showing that survival rates in mountain emergencies decrease by approximately 15% for every hour of delayed response. The judge examined the document. I'll allow it. Nicole continued. Ms. Carmichael, given this evidence that response time directly correlates with survival, you still maintain that aesthetic concerns about a parked trailer outweigh potential loss of life. That's not a fair characterization, Brenda protested. Mr. Duncan could store his equipment elsewhere and still respond to emergencies. At the cost of additional response time, correct. Possibly some additional time, yes. Time that could mean the difference between someone living or dying. That's speculative. Is it? We heard testimony from Tyler's mother about her son's rescue. Medical experts testified he would not have survived another hour in those conditions. If Mr. Duncan had needed an extra 30 minutes to retrieve his equipment from off-site storage, Tyler might be dead. Do you understand that? Brenda's face flushed. I understand that you're trying to make me look heartless, but someone has to maintain standards. Someone has to think about property values and community integrity. Mr. Duncan wants special treatment because his hobby involves helping people. His hobby. Nicole's voice rose. You just heard testimony from the sheriff describing how volunteer rescue teams are essential emergency services. You heard Mr. Duncan describe 8 years of service and 43 saved lives. And you're calling it a hobby. He's not paid. He's not required to do it. That makes it voluntary. A hobby. The exchange was brutal to watch. Nicole had Brenda cornered, and every answer made the HOA's position look worse. By the time Brenda stepped down from the witness stand, she looked rattled and defensive. The trial lasted 3 days. Both sides made closing arguments, with Nicole emphasizing public safety and the reasonableness of a limited exception for emergency equipment, while Preston focused on property rights and the precedent that would be set by overriding HOA authority. Judge Wright took the case under advisement, saying she'd issue a written ruling within 30 days. Those 30 days were agonizing. I tried to focus on normal life. Rescue calls continued, though the frequency decreased as winter transitioned to spring. I followed every HOA rule meticulously, giving Brenda no ammunition for additional complaints. I avoided media interviews, per Nicole's advice that we shouldn't try to influence the judge through public pressure. The ruling came down on a Tuesday morning in early May. Nicole called me at work. "We won," she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "Not just won, we crushed them." Judge Wright's ruling was comprehensive and scathing. She found that the HOA's parking restriction as applied to my rescue equipment was unreasonable and contrary to public policy. She noted that, while HOAs have legitimate authority to enforce aesthetic standards, this authority cannot extend to materially interfering with essential emergency services. The judge also found that the HOA had failed to reasonably consider my exception request, making a decision before even hearing my arguments at the board meeting. She called this arbitrary and capricious enforcement that violated the HOA's own governance documents, requiring fair consideration of exception requests. The ruling permanently enjoined the HOA from enforcing parking restrictions against my rescue trailer. It also required the HOA to refund all fines they'd collected and pay my attorney's fees, which, even though Nicole had worked pro bono, the judge calculated at market rates as a penalty against the HOA for their unreasonable position. That bill came to over $60,000. The HOA appealed, but the Colorado Court of Appeals affirmed the ruling 6 months later. The legal precedent was now established. HOAs in Colorado could not enforce parking or storage restrictions against bona fide emergency services equipment, where such enforcement would materially impact emergency response capabilities. The backlash against the Pine Ridge HOA board was immediate and severe. Homeowners, already frustrated with the negative publicity, and now facing a special assessment to cover the legal fees, demanded accountability. A recall petition gathered signatures within days, and by July, Brenda and 3 other board members had been voted out. The new board president was Marcus Chen, who'd moved into Pine Ridge 2 years earlier and had watched the entire debacle unfold. "First order of business," he told me at his first board meeting, which I attended out of curiosity. "We're revising our exception request process to ensure these situations get properly reviewed before enforcement action. Second, we're implementing training for board members about our actual legal obligations. And third, We're reaching out to Mr. Duncan to apologize for the treatment he received and thank him for his continued service to the community." Brenda didn't take the recall well. She showed up at that board meeting, standing in the public comment section to deliver a bitter speech about ungrateful neighbors and the death of community standards. "You're all going to regret this," she warned. "Property values will decline, the neighborhood will deteriorate, and it will be your fault." Marcus responded calmly. "Thank you for your comments, Miss Carmichael. This board will continue to maintain community standards while also exercising reasonable judgment and treating homeowners fairly. We can do both." The story should have ended there, a clean victory with lessons learned about balance and reasonableness. But Brenda wasn't finished. 2 months later, I was loading equipment after a training exercise when a sheriff's deputy pulled up. "Are you Robert Duncan?" "Yes. What's this about?" "I need you to come with me. We have some questions about vandalism and property damage." My stomach dropped. What vandalism? At the sheriff's station, I learned that someone had broken into the Pine Ridge clubhouse overnight and caused extensive damage. Spray paint on walls, equipment destroyed, records scattered. And according to security footage, the perpetrator had spray painted "Sue This" on one wall, the same phrase that had been painted on my trailer months earlier. "We're talking to everyone who's had conflicts with the HOA," the detective explained. "You're one of several people we need to interview." "I had nothing to do with this," I said. "I won my case. I have no reason to vandalize anything. Nevertheless, we need to ask some questions." The interview was thorough and uncomfortable. Where was I the previous night? Did I have anyone who could confirm my whereabouts? Did I hold a grudge against the HOA or former board members? I answered everything honestly. I'd been home, alone, which meant no alibi. But I also had no motive, and I pointed out that the "Sue This" graffiti had previously been used against me, not by me. "Someone might be trying to frame you," the detective acknowledged. "Or it might be a copycat. We're investigating all possibilities." I called Nicole, who advised me to cooperate fully, but not to volunteer information beyond what was asked. "They're doing their job. Let them investigate, and the truth will come out." The truth came out 3 days later when deputies arrested Brenda Carmichael. Additional security footage from a neighboring business had captured her car entering and leaving the Pine Ridge parking lot during the time frame of the vandalism. A search warrant of her home turned up spray paint cans and other evidence linking her to the crime. She'd apparently decided that if the community was going to abandon the standards she'd fought to maintain, she'd make them regret it. The vandalism was her way of striking back. Brenda was charged with criminal mischief, burglary, and filing a false report since she'd initially reported the vandalism, as if she'd discovered it as a concerned former board member. The case went through the court system over the following months, eventually resulting in a plea deal. She received probation, community service, and an order to pay restitution for the damages. I never spoke to her again after that. I'd see her occasionally around Boulder, always looking diminished somehow, like someone who'd invested too much of their identity in a role that was ultimately temporary and unimportant. The following winter brought new challenges and new rescues. My trailer remained parked in my driveway, ready for deployment, and nobody complained. The new HOA board even featured a profile of me and the rescue team in the community newsletter, celebrating the volunteer work happening right in the neighborhood. In March, we got a call about a group of climbers overdue on the First Flatiron, a popular rock formation near Boulder. Rescue operations on the Flatirons required specialized technical climbing gear, which we transported using the same trailer that had caused so much controversy. We found the climbers stranded on a ledge, unable to continue up or safely descend in deteriorating weather. It took 6 hours of technical rope work to extract all of them safely, lowering them one by one down the rock face to where our team waited below. One of the climbers, a young man named Jason, shook my hand after we got him down. "Thank you. I thought we were done for up there." "Just doing the job," I said. "No, seriously, thank you. You guys are heroes." I never felt like a hero. I felt like someone doing what needed to be done, using the tools and skills I had to help people when they needed it most. The fact that this had become controversial, that a parked trailer had spawned lawsuits and appeals and criminal charges, still seemed surreal. But it had also clarified something important. Sometimes the rules need to bend. Sometimes following every regulation to the letter creates outcomes that are absurd or dangerous. And sometimes you have to fight, not because you want to, but because the alternative is accepting unreasonable restrictions that harm people. The precedent from my case started influencing other situations across Colorado. Other volunteer emergency responders facing HOA restrictions now had legal ammunition to fight back. Several HOAs proactively revised their policies to accommodate emergency services equipment rather than risk similar lawsuits. Nicole Thompson, the Eclue lawyer who'd represented me, gave a presentation at a state bar conference about the case. She called it an example of creative civil liberties litigation that protected both individual rights and public safety. I attended the presentation and felt strange listening to my life being discussed in academic terms, reduced to legal principles and precedential value. The Boulder County Commissioners eventually did pass a resolution formally recognizing volunteer rescue coordinators as essential emergency personnel. It didn't have the force of law that would automatically override HOA restrictions, but it established county policy and gave weight to the idea that volunteer rescuers served a public function deserving protection. 2 years after the whole ordeal began, I was invited to speak at a community safety forum about mountain rescue operations. The audience included families who'd had loved ones rescued, aspiring volunteers interested in joining rescue teams, and local officials working on emergency preparedness. During the Q&A session, someone asked about the HOA situation. It was frustrating, I admitted, but I also understand where they were coming from, at least partially. HOAs exist because people want to maintain certain standards in their communities. That's legitimate. The problem came when those standards were applied inflexibly, without considering context or consequences. What I hope people take from what happened is that rules need to serve people, not the other way around. After the event, an older woman approached me. "I was one of the people who signed the petition against you initially," she said. "Before I understood what was really going on, I'm sorry about that. It's okay. It was complicated." "No, it's not okay. I made assumptions without getting the facts. A lot of us did. But I'm glad it worked out the way it did. Thank you for what you do." Those moments of connection, of understanding, made the struggle worthwhile. Not just the rescues themselves, but the larger recognition that volunteer service mattered and deserved support rather than bureaucratic obstacles. My trailer still sits in my driveway today, weathered and worn, painted in high-visibility colors that some people might consider an eyesore. But it's also a ready response unit, equipped and prepared for the next emergency call. And thanks to a long legal battle that I never wanted to fight but refused to surrender, it can stay there, ready to save the next life that needs saving. The rescue work continues. Every winter brings new challenges, new people in need of help, new opportunities to make a difference. I've now been volunteering for over 10 years, with more than 60 successful rescues to my credit. Some were dramatic, like Tyler's rescue from hypothermia or the technical climbing extraction from the Flatirons. Others were routine, helping lost hikers find their way back to trailheads or assisting injured people with minor problems. Each one matters. Each one reminds me why I keep doing this despite the time commitment, the physical demands, the occasional conflict with neighbors who don't understand or appreciate the work. Because when you're the person on that mountain, lost or hurt or terrified, you don't care about property values or aesthetic standards or HOA regulations. You care about someone showing up with the skills and equipment to bring you home safely. That's what the trailer represents. Not just a piece of equipment or a violation of parking restrictions, but a commitment to being ready when needed. And while it took a lawsuit, media attention, a criminal case, and more stress than I'd care to repeat, I'm glad I fought to protect that readiness. The neighborhood has moved on. Property values didn't collapse. The streets don't look cluttered or chaotic. Life continues normally for most residents who probably don't think much about the bright orange trailer in my driveway or the rescue equipment it contains. That's fine. They don't need to think about it until they need it, and then they'll be glad it's there. Marcus remains HOA president, bringing a reasonableness to the role that was sorely lacking before. We sometimes joke about the irony of a rescue team member running the association that tried to ban rescue equipment. But he takes the responsibility seriously and has genuinely improved how the HOA operates. Last month, the association even approved a budget item to install a small sign at the neighborhood entrance noting that Pine Ridge is home to volunteer emergency services personnel. It's a minor thing, but symbolic of the changed attitude. As for Brenda, I heard she moved away after completing her probation, relocating to somewhere in Arizona where presumably she could find new communities to organize and new rules to enforce. I don't wish her ill. Her intensity and commitment to order came from a genuine place, even if it manifested in destructive ways. She just couldn't accept that sometimes flexibility matters more than consistency, and that human needs occasionally override written rules. The legal precedent established by my case has been cited in 3 subsequent Colorado court decisions involving HOA disputes. Each time, courts have referenced Judge Wright's language about balancing private restrictions against public safety concerns. Nicole tells me it's becoming an important piece of HOA law in the state, and potentially influencing how courts think about these issues nationally. I never set out to establish legal precedent or challenge HOA authority broadly. I just wanted to do volunteer rescue work without harassment, using equipment I'd invested in and maintained for years. But sometimes individual conflicts become larger stories that resonate with people and create lasting change. On quiet evenings, when I'm doing maintenance on the rescue snowmobiles or organizing equipment in the trailer, I sometimes think about that first encounter with Brenda and her clipboard. How a simple dispute over parking escalated into something much larger. How many people got involved? How it could have gone differently if either of us had approached the situation with more flexibility initially. But I also think about Tyler, the 6-year-old boy we found behind that log. About Emily and her friend, the college students lost in the blizzard. About the climbers on the Flatirons and the countless other people whose names and faces blend together in memory, but who all went home safely, because our team was ready and equipped to help them. Those lives justified the fight. The legal bills, the stress, the media attention, the vandalism, All of it was worth it to preserve the capability to respond effectively to emergencies. And while I hope no other volunteer rescuer has to go through what I experienced, at least now there's legal protection and precedent to help them if they do. The mountains don't care about HOA regulations or property values or aesthetic standards. They're beautiful and dangerous, attracting people who sometimes get into situations beyond their ability to handle. When that happens, someone needs to help. Someone with the right equipment, the right training, and the willingness to head into difficult conditions to bring people back. That's what I do. That's what the trailer enables. And now, finally, I can do it without fighting my own neighborhood association for the privilege. It seems like a small victory in the grand scheme of things, but for me and for the people I help rescue, it's everything.